Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone, wherever you might be joining us from. Looks like we got a bunch of people who are jumping in here as we get started. So I'm going to kick us off and hopefully we'll have a full group as we come together. My name is Spence Wixom. I'm the president and CEO of the Brooks Group. I'm joined today with Michelle Richardson, who is our vice president of sales performance research and our head research guru. And we're excited to be with you. We're grateful that you'd be willing to spend some time with us today. We have some very exciting findings, ideas, and insights to share with you. The title of our webinar today is Essential Sales Skills for Value-Based Selling. We're particularly interested and concerned about value-based selling based on what we're seeing sellers engaging with in the market today. So many organizations that they're selling to are hypersensitive and concerned about hitting their top line numbers, about hitting their bottom line numbers, about mitigating risk in their business, about improving their cash flow and their operations. In fact, just this morning, I read a very interesting finding from some friends of mine over at SBI who have looked at CEOs and executives and their expectations for current year 2024. The large plurality of those, about 23%, think they'll meet their top line targets and their bottom line EBITDA targets, but 22% won't and don't think they'll hit either of those numbers. Only 13% think they'll exceed in both of those metrics. So there's a lot of organizations out there dealing with a lot of uncertainty as to how they perform in their outcome metrics. What we need to do, what is the responsibility of us and the sales organizations that we support, is find a way to connect the thread between what it is that we sell and the value that it provides to that organization in supporting those outcome metrics. And we're going to talk a lot about making that connection of that thread today. But one of the important things we look at and that we study and that we research and we try to understand is what behaviors, knowledge, understanding, decision-making capability of individual sellers goes into being able to tie that thread between your solution and ultimately value to the customer. And that's what we're going to explore. We want to take your questions throughout. We've already got some individuals saying hello. We have someone from Cambodia who's joined us. Welcome. It's probably not a very easy hour to be joining, so thank you. People from Northern Virginia, Maryland, Houston, Amman, Jordan, incredible as well. Thank you for joining. So excited to have you. We want to take your questions. Please put those in the chat as we're going through, and we'll try to get to them either as we go or we'll definitely save some time at the end. We have an exciting research report to allow you to download, which will be these findings plus some additional findings at the end of this session. And we just look forward to the conversation. We're also going to engage you a little bit in some conversation and some polls as we go. So let's get started. I want to turn things over to my colleague, Michelle, to give us a little bit of a background on some of the research and findings that we're going to be sharing with you today.
Thank you so much, Spence. And thank you to everyone that's joining us today. I just want to reiterate what Spence said as well. We really want to hear from you all. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat, Q&A, comments, etc. We love to make this as interactive as possible in this format. Really quickly, want to just introduce you all to our Sales Performance Research Center. If you're not familiar, we are a department within the Brooks Group. We have a threefold mission. We conduct research on topics related to developing top performing sales organizations. And so this includes the research that we're going to be talking about today. We have a 2024 Sales Leader Trend Study, another study on managing multi-generational sales teams. They're available on our website if you are interested in taking a look at those. And we have another study coming out in January. So again, we're looking to really inform the organizations that we work with on what are the best practices in managing and leading your sales organizations. We also work with clients to measure the impact of training engagements, and we use our assessment tools for diagnostic purposes, as well as helping clients select, train, coach, and retain top performers. This research that we're talking about today really touches all three of these areas. We're able to bring you best practices as well as show you the impact of training and show off as well the diagnostic purposes of these tools. In terms of why this research, so we believe that a consultative approach is imperative to succeed both in winning business and in establishing long-term customer relationships. And so we really wanted to identify the skills that are most important in a value-based approach. And so with this research, we are using data to identify skill gaps in sales teams and see how those skill gaps influence a more transactional sales approach versus a value-based approach. And then we can also identify how developing and training a team can really influence how those skills develop. So really excited to present this to you today. As Spence mentioned, we're going to be talking about a few findings, and there will be more findings in that research report, and you'll have an opportunity to download that later in our session. So let's dig in a little bit. Okay, so about the data that we're going to be talking to you today, it is based on our Impact Selling Skills Index. So what we did, the Impact Selling Skills Index is an assessment tool that we use here at the Brooks Group. It's a hard skills assessment that measures a sales professional's knowledge of selling skills within the context of the sales process. So the test essentially reveals whether sellers know the most effective approaches for given sales situations. And what we did is we looked at pre-training and post-training scores on this Impact Selling Skills Index for more than 200 sales professionals from B2B organizations in multiple industries. The screenshot that you're seeing here on the screen is the last page of the report for this assessment. So it shows you a summary of the different steps of the sales process impact, as well as the skills associated with it. So you can see the skills that we measure. There's also a sales acumen score, which is a reflection of overall sales effectiveness that's based on weighted scores across the sales process. So it is not simply an average of the previous score. So it is more of a weighted score based on certain scenarios that may be more important to the sales process or sales success than others. And what we like to do, and our purpose with using this tool, we really want to make salespeople smarter about the sales process, how they use their skills. We want to make them more effective in common sales scenarios. So this is the basis for the research that we're going to be presenting. Spence, any additional comments just on the SSI in general?
Yeah, Michelle, I'm itching to do so, and I'll tell everybody a little bit of a personal story here with this. So I've been with the Brooks Group for a couple of years, and prior to that, I've had about a 20-year career as a sales researcher, sales leader, sales enablement professional. And during all of those years, I've researched and measured about everything you can possibly measure as it relates to sales performance: time spent, activity prioritization, tool use, coaching support, skills, both observed and self-reported skill levels, and all of that. And all through that career, I always had this desire to really understand the hearts and minds of sellers. What makes them tick? What makes them think? How do they make particular decisions in certain situations? And when I ran into the Selling Skills Index, it was sort of this, where have you been all my life moment, right? Of there is a way for us to get in and really measure and evaluate the intuition of salespeople. And as we're going to be walking through the intuition, the decision-making, the kind of tacit knowledge of salespeople as they go about these various situations they encounter in a sales process. And as we go through it and we talk about it, the thing that is important to keep in mind is there's often counterintuitive elements to a sales process that sellers, through experience and through knowledge, need to understand. We naturally do things or are inclined to do things that, to be a real high-performing seller, actually doing the opposite is more effective. And what you see in this assessment and what we measure here is a salesperson through experience and through knowledge, their ability to understand those counterintuitive notions, to understand those various ways in which you should think and prioritize in the process. And it makes them stronger, more confident, and better as a result. So that's my plug for what we're doing here. And we're super excited to share the research with you.
All right, so here's an example just to give you a little bit more context around what the Selling Skills Index measures, and therefore kind of the data that we gathered and used in our analysis. So here's a sample question, and again, just to set this up, the Selling Skills Index contains 48 questions about common sales scenarios or situations that a B2B seller will encounter. And each scenario then has 4 possible strategies for addressing or responding to that scenario. And sellers will rank them from 1 to 4. So either like most effective way to address to least effective, or the sample here, most likely reason to least likely. So you're ranking them. It's a rank. It's not a forced choose one answer only. We have them rank. And so let's take a look at this particular sample. You've completed your presentation, and you were told that you'd know something in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you discover that your prospective buyer had bought from a competitor. Where did you make a mistake? And then these are the 4 options. You gave too much information and confused the buyer, forcing them to look elsewhere. You did not create enough value for your product or service compared to your competitor. You didn't go beyond their stated needs and failed to gain commitment. Or you failed to develop sufficient trust. So again, this is just a sample question. Participants or respondents would read this, and then they would rank the 4 options, essentially from, in this case, most likely to be the reason for the mistake to least likely. So Spence, we're going to have a little fun with the audience, and we're going to let you all respond to this question in the form of a poll. So if we could launch that poll. And what we'd like you all to do is review this scenario and pick the answer that you think is the best. Okay, and I encourage you all to read the question and just focus on the question. Don't read anything else into it. And let's see how the audience will do.
See where it goes.
Yes. Yep. And again, there are 48 questions on the Selling Skills Index, and for each step in the process or each set of skills, the respondent gets a score, and that they will also get tips for improvement that will also align with the feedback. So this is really interesting, Spence. Looking at the results.
It is interesting the way to see it's laying out like this. And this is part of the reason we are doing this. What you'll notice here is that there is no absolute kind of 1 right answer and 3 wrong answers. There's kind of a probability or a likelihood of each of them. And what's interesting here, as we did this with the group here, you did not create enough value for your product or service compared to your competitor. 60% of the individuals on the call said that was the most likely, or the one that would be in first position. And that's correct.
Congratulations.
We have found in our research and our experience that is the most likely scenario. Now, what's interesting is the second most likely is number 4, that 13% of individuals chose. You failed to develop sufficient trust. We find, again, in our research and our experience, that trust and value being the 2 most prominent. The number 3, you didn't go beyond their stated needs and failed to gain commitment. That's number 3, 24% there. And everybody looks like 4% on the 4th. You gave too much information and confused the buyer, forcing them to look elsewhere. So that was our lowest rated among this group, and that would be the lowest of the 4. So you can kind of see that this group naturally followed in a similar thought pattern or reasoning pattern to what sellers would do. And that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for somebody who can memorize the absolute right answer. We're looking to measure, can people think critically and reasonably through, have a good intuition in evaluating the various possibilities here.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And again, think about this question too. And the best answer was you did not create enough value for your product or service compared to your competitor. And really, that's what we're talking about today, right? The skills associated with value-based selling. And so we're going to move on, and we've talked a little bit about the impact process, and we've mentioned that. So we want to give folks a quick overview of impact and those skills associated with it, because as we look at the impact selling skills index data, this is kind of how we have arranged, we're going to be talking about the stages of the process. And so as you can see, it is a 6-step sales process. And within each step are the skills associated with each step. And again, as we look at the skills, we're looking at what really contributes to value-based selling. And we have the investigate step, positioning, prospecting, pre-call planning, the meet step, building trust, creating that positive impression, the probe step, asking questions to determine needs and wants, so that really the discovery aspect of the sales process, the apply step, which is really building that value, connecting your solution to needs and wants. The convince step, proving your claims. This is where you may do a demo, share samples, justify your price. And then the tie it up step, asking for the business and determining next steps. Also, just want to note that in impact, in our methodology, a seller should really spend 70% of their time in that front half of the process. This is where we understand what the customer wants and needs from our solution, from our partnership. And then the back half of the process, the apply, convince, and tie it up, is really more about persuading the customer. And we only want to spend about 30% of our time there.
But what we
Spence,
find, Michelle, oh, sorry, Michelle, just to add to this, what we
Yep.
find and have designed into this selling skills index tool is a way to measure the intuition, the confidence, the knowledge of sellers as they go into each of these steps of the process. Are they confident in knowing the right ways to handle or the right things to do in the investigate step? Are they confident and know the right way to think about setting up that meeting, in doing that discovery and applying? And we're looking for that good situational judgment in each of these steps, because we know the more confident, capable, knowledgeable we can make sellers in attacking the situations in each of these steps, the more smoothly this process is going to go, the more consultative they can be, the more engaged they can be with customers in selling value.
Exactly, exactly. And the selling skills index, so that sample question that we just did, the tool that we've been talking about, the questions on the assessment map to each of these stages. So there are questions across each of these stages. So again, that allows us to really be able to measure a seller's knowledge and skill set within each step. So we've talked about kind of where the data has come from, introduced you to the selling skills index. We've level set on the breakdown of the process and those skills. So let's dig into these findings in our research. And finding number 1, before training, sellers push product instead of selling value. So before training, what our research found, and again, we were looking at before and after training scores for more than 200 B2B sellers, what we found is that sellers score highest in the areas related to presenting and talking about their product or service. So the highest scores are for the apply step, which again, that's recommending your solution, and the convince step, which is proving your claims, handling objections, doing your demos, that kind of thing. So really, this is where sellers can talk about their product. It's really about focusing on kind of what they want to have happen, right? We're going to talk about our product, our service. We're going to talk about our features, all the aspects of this. We find that this is common, in particular, a common pattern in technical sellers, complex solutions, where there are a lot of features and product aspects to talk about. And the other thing is this is typical. This is a typical area where companies may do a lot of training on, right? Product training, how to present the product, how to conduct your demo, how to talk about the features. So again, if you look at kind of average scores on the Selling Skills Index, and this is the percentage of time that sellers chose the number one answer and ranked the number one answer, the most effective answer, as number one. Okay, so these are the scores we're looking at. And what they're doing is the highest scores are showing that they're really focusing kind of in that area of product.
Michelle, I think there's a really interesting meta finding here that I want to call out to everyone as we dive into this data. As Michelle said, the scores you see on each of the bars there, that is a percentage out of 100 that they got the right answer, the best answer in the number one spot. And so what's interesting, what that tells you as an overall story, when you think about sellers, and this of course is across different tenures of sellers, different types of sellers, all of that in our population, but most sellers know kind of the right answer about half the time. That's the level of clarity, that's the level of intuition that you see kind of as a default among sellers in a population. They kind of know the right answer about half the time. So what does that do? Well, if you're not certain, if you're not confident in the right answer as you go into those situations, that lack of confidence and certainty can have you flailing around, can have you doing things that might be intuitive, but are wrong in engaging with the customer, right? You might follow intuition, as we see here, to talk about yourself, to present yourself first without stepping back and understanding or doing deeper discovery with the customer to connect your solution more effectively to them. You might be focused more heavily on price in the conversation and less on really creating a deep value formula or value presentation, for the customer. Maybe it might be something as simple as talking too much, not listening enough. But it was a really interesting thing for us to look at this data and say, boy, on the average, we only really get it right about half the time in our sort of natural state as salespeople. So how do we push that upward?
Yeah, great observations. And the other thing, just kind of adding to your thoughts there, Spence, as we talk about skills for value-based selling, what we have here with this particular graph pattern, and again, with that emphasis on the persuade section of the sale, right? And in particular, talking about product, presenting product, showing product or service, is that this lends itself to a more transactional approach. Where we really learn to understand the customer, really kind of focus on the customer is in those earlier stages, the investigate, the meet, and the probe. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more and those findings here in just a few minutes. But again, what we're seeing is if you have sellers that have a more transactional approach, chances are they're going to be really focusing more kind of towards this end stage of the process, again, talking about product and service, as opposed to really spending the time to understand the customer.
And what's interesting, right, is as individual sellers take this, you see a different baseline skyline for each individual seller. And there you can diagnose, how close or far away in each of these areas their intuition is from best practice. This is our average, but you'll see different high and low skylines as you look at individual salespeople.
Exactly. This is representing that average. So, obviously individual scores may vary. And so again, as we talk about this being more of a transactional approach and we want to shift to that value-based approach, what we really have to understand is understanding the customer and how customers really define value. So within the context of impact and our methodology, we teach that value is subjective, right? Value is what the customer perceives it to be. And so in order to convey value to the customer, we have to understand kind of what it is that they are looking for. So let's talk a little bit about that definition of value. So if you have taken impact selling or any of our sales training here at the Brooks Group, you've probably seen this. This is our value formula. And this is how we teach, what value is, how to build value with a customer. And so value equals the perceived benefits that the customer will receive over the perceived price or the perceived emotional cost that the customer will then have to part with, right, or deal with in order to accept your solution. And so the higher the perceived benefits, the more perceived benefits that you can create with a customer or communicate to a customer, the more that outweighs the perceived price, and the customer sees great value. And so again, it is really about understanding what the customer perceives as value, what they want and need from the solution in order to be able to create that value.
And what's interesting about this, Michelle, this formula and the way we measure a baseline salesperson's sort of intuition as it relates to this formula is there's multiple elements or variables involved in it. And what we're looking for is a seller who can synthesize all of these variables together to, as I said earlier, connect that thread from what it is that you're selling, your solution, to that true ROI benefit effect that it will have on the customer's business, because you understand not only the benefits that your solution provides, but you also understand both the direct and hidden costs that any organization will incur to adopt that. And so you can see in a holistic sense how that solution will affect their business. And when you have sellers who are thinking across all of these different dimensions and are incorporating all of these different variables, they're much more effective working with complex buying groups that have multiple stakeholders with different goals or mandates or budgets that they're concerned about or caring for. You can speak more consultatively to the way you create value in the organization. You can also think about this when you look at this whole equation. You can think about the areas in which a seller might only get part of it, right? They might only be comfortable talking to that top line benefit, that numerator, or they might only be comfortable evaluating and negotiating just the price component, not understanding the other negotiables or variables in cost and adoption that customer might be considering. So what we're trying to find as we measure and support salespeople is how much of this equation or this formula they bring to bear in generating and demonstrating value for clients. I would love to just take a quick moment, Michelle, if that's okay, and kind of engage our audience here a little bit to see, and I'm trying to think about the exact kind of way to do this, is how far along do you feel your salespeople are in incorporating all of these variables in the way they present value? Is this a thing you feel, because as we showed in the data before, yes, this leads out in the various areas of a sales process as far as sellers' intuition and capability, but we still feel there's a long way to go. I would love to just hear from some in the audience, like how far down a path to demonstrating value in this way you feel sellers in your organization are today.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm very curious as well. As you think about even the previous graph that we were showing, kind of with that focus more on presenting product or doing demos, and do you see them kind of focusing more there versus maybe questioning skills and that sort of thing? Amber, my sellers are eager to use this approach. They need the skills. Yes. Yeah, and that's the great thing, is these skills are teachable. These are all trainable skills, all things that can be developed.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary, we're all on board, but don't really know how to do it. Yeah.
Great. We hear there from Denise a more of an important focus on probing so they understand the client or customer situation that they can layer this value into. We have a range of new sellers to experience, but transactional selling is a lot of what we see. It's a lot of organizations are that way. Again, it's what's so interesting is we know that the default state for sellers is I'm comfortable with the features of what I sell. I'm comfortable talking about myself. That positioning and that understanding of how to connect it to the business outcomes of the client That's where we want to develop them.
Yeah. The other thing, Spence, I see with some sellers, particularly when we talk about these emotional costs, because, we talk about like perceived price. Everybody in sales is like, oh, our price was too high. We lost the deal because our price was too high. They may not even be comfortable asking questions to really uncover what the emotional cost might be. What are the risks of change? What are the greater fears that might be holding someone back that could be outweighing the potential benefits? And so being able to uncover as much of the potential roadblocks or obstacles as well as those benefits is extremely important, I think, to really using this value-based selling approach to really applying a strong value formula.
I agree. It's a very proactive strategy for dealing with objections as well.
Yeah.
If you've done the
Yeah.
critical thinking and the evaluation in your discovery, in your preparation for the presentation of value, to consider all of those other variables, it can help to neutralize late stage objections.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see here, Brooke says, we have a huge product portfolio, so it's easy to get caught up in knowing all of the details. Yes. I mean, that's, one of the keys, I think, to selling. And as I remember Bill Brooks, our founder, used to say, is product knowledge is about taking the knowledge that you have and being able to apply it specifically to that particular client, selectively identifying the benefits that are going to be most important to that client, rather than maybe talking about all of the details, all of the features, all of the benefits. So definitely a key there.
I do want to call out Mohammed's comment really quickly as well. We focus on value and long-term relationship with our partners, not customers. So he's in a kind of a selling or influencing role or leadership of an organization that is engaging with partners. And I think it's an important thing to think about across different, customer or market stakeholders that we would be dealing with is, are we developing long-term strategic partner-like relationships with them? And we that goes back to the question we asked earlier, right? The sample question that we did of what is most important and what is most likely to cause a late stage loss and concern there. It's we didn't generate enough value, perceived value in the part of the customer. We didn't develop enough trust. And if you think about that, trust and value, those are the foundations, those are the pillars that hold up long-term, strategic, mutually beneficial relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So again, talking about those perceived benefits, the perceived price, perceived emotional cost, that's the value formula. We really have to understand that that customer's perspective in order to make a more prescriptive recommendation. And that really kind of takes us into our second finding. So our second, before training, sellers score lowest on discovery and closing skills. And so, as you can see here, the lowest scores pre-training were around the tie it up step, which is closing and asking for the business, followed by the probe step, which is discovering a buyer needs. And we've kind of been alluding to at least that probe step finding, in our conversation up to this point. But this means, again, we've been talking about sellers really focused on presenting that solution rather than on understanding what the customer wants and needs. So the focus on the product itself rather than on understanding the customer and being able to connect the dots between kind of what the customer is really looking for, what they want to buy, why they want to buy it, can lead to difficulty in closing, right? So again, there we have those lower scores in the tie it up step. And so pre-training sellers are weaker in these closing steps of the process. And that may indicate that they may also have difficulty asking for the business, or they are encountering late stage stalls or objections because of that ineffective questioning earlier in the process, right? They didn't quite understand what the customer perceives as value. That kind of connects back to that sample selling skills index question that we did as the poll. And really the key skills that lead to that value-based approach are going to be in that investigate, meet, and especially the probe step, really having that good quality conversation or conversations, multiple conversations with your stakeholder.
Great. I want to call out a comment that Jamie Tudabang, who I'm assuming is joining us from somewhere in Brazil. The comment was in Portuguese, but I'm going to dust off my knowledge of Portuguese and translate the comment here. It says, creating value in a product is a lot about, to a large degree, related to emotion or focused on connecting with emotion on the part of the customer. Jamie, tell me if I got that translation half decent. But that's a lot of what we talk about in this probe step. Are we getting deep enough to really understand what is driving a emotional engagement or a forward moving emotional drive in the customer? And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the aims, the emotional drivers of that customer, it's very difficult for us to connect a solution to that. And Michelle, as you were saying, it really isn't surprising to us that the lowest value here across all of these stages is in that tie it up. And it's not necessarily, I think, based on a deficiency of action or decision making at the absolute end of the process. It's a result of things not done, decision making not done, priorities not focused on, or intuition not followed earlier in the process that leads to that late stage. And what ultimately happens in that late stage, if you haven't set the foundation of good probing and presenting a valuable solution that connects emotionally to that customer, then you've got one of two situations, one of two paths to both sides of the correct path. And those are either you're overly confident, you have hubris in asking for the business, and you do when the customer still has concerns or isn't emotionally engaged, in which case they ghost you, they go with somebody else, they go with your competitor. It breaks that relationship of trust. Or you don't feel that confidence in asking for the business. And we see this with a lot of sellers. And so you don't do it, or you feel it's too hard, or you kind of gently step around it. And then that doesn't engage the customer emotionally. It doesn't give that customer the confidence or the trust in you that you're confident that the solution you'll provide adds value. So again, we run into those two misguided paths in tying it up and asking for the business if we haven't laid that foundation correctly.
Great point. Really, that tied up step, that closing is kind of a natural occurrence of everything that's happened earlier in the process. And, we will have clients come to us and say, my sellers need help with closing skills. We need closing training. And what we typically find is maybe they don't necessarily need closing training. What they need is training earlier in the process. They need better questioning skills, right? Maybe they need a little bit of help in qualifying opportunities and making sure they're getting the best opportunities through their pipeline. So everything that you've just said, I wholeheartedly agree with. And so as we think about asking those better questions, really understanding what the customer wants and needs, that emotional aspect of sales, as was mentioned in the chat. One of the techniques that you can employ with your sellers, we call it 3 deep questioning, but it really is about going deeper in questioning, right? So sellers may have a tendency to focus at that needs level, right? The surface level questions to uncover enough information to be able to create a proposal, spec a product, identify which product to recommend, and then they move on. And what we would encourage is asking those deeper level questions. We want to understand not only what your customer needs from you in terms of product or service or offering, but why they want it. What's that emotion driving the purchase? Is it risk aversion, right? It's the why. Is it they want to look better in front of their colleagues. They want peace of mind. There's a financial gain, there's something, but we want to understand kind of those emotional drivers. And so as you're coaching salespeople in their questioning skills, I would encourage you to coach them to ask better follow-up questions. Things like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Why is that? What impact is that having? So when your customer answers with a surface level question, go at least 2 levels deeper to uncover more information.
And Michelle, there's one thing I do want to add here too that I think is critically important as we think about this. Again, this selling skills index, we can measure an intuition or a kind of tacit knowledge around questioning and discovery. But I do believe there's a broader sort of mindset and skill set associated with the seller that plays here. So it's not just basically training your people on what to do or what to know or what intuition to have in these moments. It's also changing that mindset of the seller away from themselves and toward the customer. And where that can get clouded, where that can get distracted is if a seller is in one of two positions. If a seller is hyper-focused or anxious on production in a given week, month, quarter, then they're focused on themselves and their status in the organization and what they're trying to accomplish. And it's very difficult for an individual in that kind of emotional stress about their own situation to truly be focused on the customer. So that's one thing you want to think about. The other thing you want to think about is really developing in individuals or finding individuals for your sales organization who have that curiosity, who have that genuine interest and attention aimed toward the customer and not just towards, say, themselves, their status in the organization, their production, their rewards and accolades, things like that. Really trying to help that sales force focus mind and attention away from themselves and toward the customer, then giving them the right intuition to execute this kind of discovery effectively. Very important change we're trying to bring in sellers. But first of all, we've got to assess where they're at currently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One other point on that, this getting to the why, right? The why and those follow-up questioning skills, that curiosity, that's what drives value. That's what drives that value-based selling approach. And it builds trust with the customer because the customer is going to see that the seller is genuinely interested in understanding their situation, applying the right solution. And so that's really going to be the basis of building that value as well as building that trust with the customer. And as we've already talked about, 2 things that are just absolutely essential. Your sellers are selling trust, they're selling value, not necessarily the product. The product just kind of comes along for the ride, or your solution comes along for the ride. So our next finding, let's shift kind of gears and think about those after training scores. So what we've been looking at, the first couple of findings that we shared are pre-training scores. What we want to talk about now is how training can influence this skill development. Okay, and so scores after training improve more than 20% on average across the sales process, across the impact process. So that's an average of these skills. This is an average of individual seller improvement across the sales process and in each of these skills associated with those steps. And so scores improved the most in the probe step, right? So we've been talking about the questioning skills, and then second highest in the tie it up step. So they improved most in those questioning and those closing skills. Spence, thoughts on this?
Well, the thing that's most exciting to me, and the question, of course, we always get with individuals is, can we improve intuition? Can we strengthen individuals' knowledge base through training and through reinforcement and practice? And the answer that we saw very clearly here as we did this study is yes, we can. And not only can we improve that intuition, we can improve that intuition in the areas very specifically where it's weakest. We can attack those areas and we can get people a lot stronger and a lot more confident in making decisions and handling situations throughout a sales process. Again, I go back to what I said earlier, which I think is a really important sort of overarching point to all of this, is what we know when we see salespeople in the first instance, and we measure them in the first instance, sort of out in the wild, so to speak, is we know they can kind of figure out the right answer about half the time, but they're not super confident and definitive in knowing the right answer. But through training, practice, application, and coaching, we can really significantly build that confidence and that knowledge about the right thing to do in certain situations. And once they have that confidence and that knowledge, you see a much better production and execution of the role, which leads to better selling outcomes. It leads to stronger win rates, shorter cycle times, bigger average deal sizes because they're doing effective probe and they're applying larger, more consultative solutions to customers. All of those business or sales velocity metrics can improve when you sharpen the confidence and the intuition of the sellers.
Yes, and we had a question come in from Kelly. So just to kind of clarify this finding, there is a pre-test on selling situations. They are scored. Then we conduct the training, and then we retest with the same questions using the same or similar scenarios. Yes. So we use this assessment as part of our pre-training process with organizations that we work with. So this is one of the assessments that they'll receive. We conduct the training, and then we reassess them, and it is the same assessment. We will reassess them, and this group was reassessed between 9 and 12 months post-training. So these scores reflect a change in the range of 9 to 12 months post-training. And then speaking of kind of that training process, the next finding that we have here is that reinforcement helps sellers improve their sales acumen score. So on the assessment, there is an overall, what we call sales acumen score. It is a reflection of overall sales effectiveness based on weighted scores across the sales process. So this is not an average of the scores in the 6 steps of impact. It is a separate score. And so we measured the change in the overall sales acumen score. And organizations who did not engage in some kind of post-training reinforcement, their sellers saw a 6% increase in their sales acumen score. Organizations that did have reinforcement follow-up post-training improved their overall sales acumen score 13%. So almost twice, a little over twice, 2 times the change in using reinforcement as not using the reinforcement.
And it to us is a very significant delta between these two. When you look at the overall acumen of the sellers improving 2x with the reinforcement versus without the reinforcement. And I think what's interesting, if you dive a little bit deeper into this data, is each of the components of reinforcement that we tested improved the, as I call it, the confidence and the decision-making ability of those sellers. So of course the training is going to do a piece of it. But then if you have continued coaching and support, manager to individual or trainer to individual, that improves it. If you have digital reinforcement modules and ability to practice and apply the skills, that improves it even more. So this is where the great opportunity is created for those in learning and development and an enablement of salespeople, is all of the different components that you can put together in your organization: training, coaching, digital reinforcement, and practice, and execute them, drive utilization of the sales force around them, the better and stronger will be that confidence and that decision-making ability.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so just to kind of recap some of our findings here, so pre-training, what we found, sellers really focus on those apply and convince, the presenting product and service stages of the sales process, really more focused on that aspect. What we found is that scores around questioning skills and closing skills were the lowest. So that presented the best opportunity for improvement, right? And those are especially that probe step, those questioning skills, really critical to developing a more value-based sales approach. We found that after training, the skills across the board in each step of the sales process improved, but they improved the highest in the questioning skills, the probe step, and the tie it up. And then what we found is their overall sales acumen, their ability to make those good decisions in weighted sales scenarios improved as well, and they improved more significantly with reinforcement. So as you are thinking about your sales teams and putting together a sales development path, particularly if you're looking to shift to more of a value-based approach, kind of be thinking about those skills that you really need to focus on, as well as utilizing some form of reinforcement to make sure that those skills are sustained, beyond the training event.
Kelly asked a really good follow-up question here, and I'll read it. How would you measure sales impact, not just acumen? What I mean by this is someone can get the answer correct on a test, but are they actually applying the skill when in the scenario in real life? And Kelly, that's a really good question to ask. And the way we like to think of it is in various levels. And you may have heard these levels before. They echo with the Kirkpatrick method that has been around for a while for learning and development. But it's the idea that, first of all, you want to measure at the first level, does a person have a good learning experience? Do they feel like it's a quality learning experience? And most organizations measure very well at that level. The second level is, was knowledge actually transferred? Are they smarter? Are they more confident in that tacit knowledge than they were before? That's what we're getting at with this particular assessment. For many, many years, and this goes back to the excitement I expressed at the beginning of this webinar in finding this tool and engaging with this tool, is I'd always wanted to measure that level too. I always wanted to find an elegant way to measure knowledge transfer because I felt like that was a piece that was missing. And we feel with this assessment, we have a good way of measuring and substantiating that level 2 knowledge transfer. But there are also 2 additional levels to this, right? You measure application of the skills, and that can be done through practice modules. AI has done a lot to really support in that level 3 measurement of looking at the actual application of the skills, either in practice or in live situations with sellers. It's done through observation or through AI-enabled measurement, things like that. And then fourth, of course, is I've had a good learning experience. I've transferred knowledge. I can apply that knowledge effectively to my role. Does it have an effect on the business? And one of the things we do always as we're developing sales organizations is measure the effect of that change in behavior on business performance outcomes, specifically the ones that I listed earlier. We try to make that connection between a change in behavior and does it drive a material result in sales velocity? Does it make better win rates, quicker cycle times, larger average deal sizes, more deals? And what is the return to the business ultimately of that? So you really should be thinking about ultimately measuring at all of those different levels. This is just one of them, but one we're very excited about because it's a step that a lot of organizations miss when they're developing sellers.
Yes. And so as part of our cadence with working with organizations, we do these measurement, we have these measurement intervals. So obviously post-training, we're going to give feedback on the experience, the confidence level of the sellers, having been through the training in terms of applying the skills. At 6 months, we do more of the business impact, that ROI type study. And then at 9 months, roughly, we will do the selling skills index retake. So it kind of gives a kind of a full spectrum of measurement and gives our clients data as well to really understand kind of where the impact of the training has been. As you can see here, we've got a QR code to download the full report. There are more findings than the ones that we shared, and there's more information on the findings that we did share as well. So there's more information on findings around even the investigate step, right? Positioning, prospecting, pre-call planning, the meet step. as well, again, as what we've also shared. So I encourage you all to download the report. Would love to get any additional questions. If there's anyone out there that still has questions for us on value-based selling, on the findings from the research, please feel free to pop those into the chat. And Spence, I'm gonna got a couple of questions here as well.
Great.
Can you use an assessment like this before hiring a new person or onboarding? Like, we've talked specifically about this in terms of training diagnostics, but how about other uses?
So I'll give you my thoughts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. The answer is
Sure.
yes. This is a great way, as you can see, in measuring the baseline, it's a great way to see on an individual where perhaps they have stronger capability, weaker capability. If there's particular areas of a sales process that are really important for your sellers to get right or to have as baseline capability, this is an assessment you can use as part of an overall evaluation of new hires. So the answer is yes. Michelle, I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that.
Yes, absolutely. And we do have clients that use this as part of their selection process. There is another portion of the assessment as well. Like, I would not base a full hiring decision on just this piece. But we also have additional assessments as well that can speak to how someone will perform, their motivations, their mindset, and additional competencies as well.
So let me just answer the quick question from
Yes, go
Scott.
ahead.
Yes, Scott, the webinar is being recorded, and we are happy to share this out. So thank you for that question. That was a detail we missed in announcing at the beginning.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And again, please feel free to download the report. You all are getting exclusive kind of first look at access to it. Another question for you, Spence, as well. So what other skills associated with the probe step do you think sellers can improve upon? Like, we've talked a lot about like specifically questioning and asking follow-up questions, but as you think about the probe step in general, other skills kind of associated with that?
Well, I think it's very important for, and I used to teach for a while sales to undergraduate students. And as I taught probing or discovery to them, one of the things that I realized is we're very good about asking questions, even open-ended questions about the topic of conversation we're most comfortable with. In many instances, our product, our company, what it is that the customer may want to do as it relates to us and what we sell. We're less comfortable, and I've seen this both in teaching students about sales as well as in professionals about sales, of just having more general business conversations as they relate to the customer's business, the aims, the broader situation that customer may find themselves in. And that's really the muscle that needs to be strengthened in discovery. It's not just a matter of the tactical open-ended questions, though that is important, and being able to go deeper to those emotional wants and whys, also important, but being able to have that conversation at a level that is across that customer's business, across their operations, as it relates to their financial performance. You've got to have a certain degree of acumen to be able to have those kinds of conversations. Developing that acumen in your sales force, I think, is important.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I would add to that as well, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but asking those questions that might surface potential objections or obstacles down the road, or that might lead to a difficult conversation. And I think sometimes sellers tend to avoid those because they don't want to raise the issue, but that issue is likely going to be raised later in the process anyway. Again, kind of speaks to maybe difficulty closing. So you might as well get those issues out on the table and be able to create your strategy for selling around that or for dealing with it, rather than encountering it later in the sales process.
It's a great answer. Great answer.
Yeah. So
listen, we are right at the hour here. So want to kind of close up, say thank you to everyone who's joined us, who's contributed to our conversation. Hopefully you've had a chance to, or taken a picture of the QR code to download the report. We've really appreciated spending this time with you. We are eager to continue to support you, continue the dialogue and the relationship. Please follow the Brooks Group on LinkedIn if you don't already. And please connect with Michelle and me on LinkedIn. We'd love to just begin that collaborative relationship. So thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon and good luck with your fourth quarters.
Thank you.